I made something for you guys. It's a tutorial! Hello friends! Welcome to my channel made by B Jax. I'm Brittany Jackson. Long time no see. I've had a lot going on, but most importantly, I've been cooking up some toots. Toots and tutorials. This one being the Sentro tutorial, the Sentro Sweater tutorial. I've had my Sentro for over a year, and just like many of you guys, after the first few tries with it, I wanted to break it like it broke me. So I was determined to make the Sentro machine my bitch. All of that frustration just motivated me to figure the damn thing out. That's probably a lot to ask for someone who doesn't even know how to knit. I just know how to crochet, which, disclaimer, you must know how to crochet. At least the basics of crochet, like slip stitch and single crochet. But my determination is relentless. I spent months and months watching hundreds of tutorials on YouTube. I learned a little bit of something from each tutorial, but nobody was like a one-stop shop where I just had everything. There were a lot of things that were skipped, or like, oh, watch another tutorial. Learn how to do this stitch this way. Learn how to do this stitch this way. All you need to know before you start this is how to do a slip stitch and how to do a single crochet, and just have the damn machine. Have a machine. And of course the materials that we discuss later. We're gonna go through it all. You'll be able to easily pick up where you left off with the chapter markers that I'm gonna put down at the bottom and in the description. Are you ready? Yeah. Yes. Let's go over the different variations that I made. So this was the very first one that I made with no decreases for the neck hole. They're just 4 regular rectangle panels all put together for the body. This is a size small, just like the one that I recorded here on camera for you guys. Also a size small, only difference is the neck hole, which I demonstrate. It's up to you to decide if you do or don't want to do the neck decrease cutout. This next version is a medium, or what I would consider a medium. I made this for my best friend. She wanted a baggier fit, and I'll give you the instructions for that. This last version was for my boyfriend. He usually wears a size large. This is what it looks like on me versus him. And he's 6 foot tall, 220 pounds. Here's a surprise variation. So this is made the exact same way that I'm going to show you in this tutorial. The only thing I did different is I did not sew up the front panels and I added these straps. Let's talk about our construction plan in the order of everything we're about to do, starting with a regular back panel. We'll do that twice. And then we're going to move on to the left front panel with that little cutout for the neck hole, and then the right front panel with the neck hole cutout. Then we're going to sew those together, and then bring in the back panel, sew those together, and then sew the shoulders together, and then the sides all the way up to the armpit area. Next, we'll crochet around the armholes, and then I'll show you how to make the arms in the tube setting, and we'll make 2 of those. After that, we're going to sew the arms onto the body, and then I'm going to show you how to do the cuffs, and then the collar and waist, all with single crochet ribbing. This is the little overhead view of the plan for my sweater, and I have a blank version for you if you want to fill one out too. Next, I'd like to show you the row counts that I did for each size. The left side of the diagram will show the full length of the row count, and the right side shows everything cut in half for you to do this checkerboard layout. Let's jump into the materials now. Here's a little overview of the yarn details. Pro tip, if your machine is resisting the yarn, stop using it. Switch to a different yarn, please. Next, we're gonna break out the 5mm hook and the handy dandy 4mm hook. We've got tapestry needles, stitch markers, scissors, waste yarn. Another pro tip, use this museum wax at the bottom of the feet of your machine if you don't want your machine to shimmy itself into the abyss while you're cranking. And then lastly, this is not necessary, but I did use this digital row counter. You just have this little magnet piece that you clip on anywhere on your machine, and then every time it passes by, it counts the row. So I love it. You don't have to have it, but it is super handy. Let's get started on making one of our back panels. So we know this last white peg and these first 2 pegs do not work in panel mode. So we're going to attach our yarn on this 3rd peg. So starting with our waist yarn, we're going to start directly on this 3rd peg. I'm going to hook it and then crank this until it completely tucks down and it's secure. So now that that's secured, I'm going to go behind the next peg and then in front of the peg after that. And we're going to do that all the way around up until this very last peg, stopping on that knuckle. So behind, in front, all the way around. Right before you reach that white peg, we're going to keep it going, and I'll show you when to stop. Coming up on this last peg, I want to emphasize that I am aligning this with the knuckle right after that, wrapping my yarn around and then feeding it through the yarn feeder and tension guider. Double check to make sure that you are in panel mode, and we're going to keep cranking in this direction until it completely locks. Now we're going to start working backwards all the way around. So give your yarn a little tug in the tension feeder as you're getting started going the opposite way. That's a little trick that I figured out that I like and works for me. Whenever you start going backwards, your yarn is just a little bit loose at the beginning. So I like to give it a little bit of tug. If your starting tail is super short, you can give it a little tug before you crank all the way to the end. And once again, going backwards, giving my yarn a little tug at the beginning of this row, and then working my way all the way until my wheel completely stops. Sometimes you'll see these little lifted stitches. Be aware of those. We don't want our stitches to lift. And that's the only thing that sucks about panel mode. You have to pay attention to the beginning and end of every single row. In fact, it happens quite a few times throughout this tutorial. I'm just here to show you that it's okay when it happens. The Sentro machine is not easy. Like, see, there it happened again. Just push that bad boy down so that you can finish that stitch and all is good. We're going to keep going back and forth with this waste yarn. I'm just going to use up this whole little ball of yarn. I'd suggest doing 10 to 15 rows of waste yarn before we move on to our main color. Alright, I've used up all of my waste yarn and I'm cranking all the way until it stops. Now I'm going to lift my old color up and out, bringing in my new color. So I'm going to start with a very long tail. We're going to use this tail to finish off some of the edging pieces and do some of the sewing. So I just wrap it around my hand quite a few times, lifting up the old color and unhooking it. Just FYI, everything is safe right here. That yarn is tucked up underneath that hook. It's not going to go anywhere. So I'll just crank backwards a little bit and get this tail out of the way and crank until this knuckle right here aligns with the feeder. Bringing in that super long tail, I'm going to just toss it into the center here, feed it through my feeder and then my tension guide. And then I like to grab both of those tails of the yarn transitioning, not that starting tail, let me get that out of the way. These two tails where we're transitioning, I hold them both at the same time, just for a second while I'm kicking off this first row. Make sure that your row counter is on, if you are using one, by the way. So this is our row 1. We are paying attention to any lifted stitches at the end or beginning of our rows. We're tugging our yarn whenever we get started in the opposite direction. If you don't have a digital row counter, I'll show you how to manually count your rows in just a second. Aside from that, everything is just like the waste yarn that I just walked you through. We're going to do 45 rows of this light green color, or whatever color you're using, and then I'm going to show you how to transition your colors. If you need to manually count your stitches, just pull on the fabric and count down from one of these knuckles and count every row of yarn that you see all the way until the end where your waste yarn begins. Right now I am finishing up my 45th row, making sure I crank all the way to the end here. Now I'm cutting off my yarn and you don't need a very long tail. So I'm going to crank this back until I get to the knuckle where my stitches start. Moving my old tail back out of the way and bringing in my new color. I aim to get them about the same length. They don't have to be long tails because we're not using these tails to finish any edges. Make sure you reset your row counter if you are using one, and make sure your yarn is through the tension guider as well before you start kicking off. And there you go, simple as that. That is how you transition your colors. We're gonna do 45 more rows in this other color. If you are doing a solid colored sweater, then for the size small, this would just be 90 rows total. If you are making a different size, then reference the size chart in the beginning of this video with the row counts for the medium and the large. Other than that, continue paying attention to the beginning and end of your rows for any of those slip stitches, and keep cranking back and forth until you get all the rows that you need. By the way, you can totally tie those two strands together right now at this point. I like to do that just so that they're a little bit more secure and the stitches don't look all loose and stuff while I'm working. So do that if you want. It's optional. Right now I'm finishing up my 45th row in the dark green color, cranking all the way until my wheel stops completely. Now, since this is an edge row, we're gonna need a lot of yarn. So I'm just winding this up around my hand just quite a few times. Then I cut the yarn off from the skein and then crank backwards until this knuckle before the panel aligns with my yarn feeder. I'll lay my yarn down. Now let's get this waist yarn so that we can have some clean edges. This can be a really short tail. Feed it through the yarn guide and tension guide. Now I'm holding both of these strands at the same time and then starting my waist yarn rows. I'm just going to keep cranking back and forth until I use this entire little ball of yarn, but you really only need 10 to 15 rows. I've used up all of my waist yarn now, and I'm just releasing this yarn from the hooks, and now I'm going into tube mode and cranking with no yarn in my feeder. We're gonna go around twice. This is releasing all the yarn from the hooks, and now this is releasing them off of the machine completely. Don't you love how clean, pristine, and beautiful that was? Now you can look at your whole project that you just made, give it a good stretch. Now let's clean up these edges. I know there's a lot of yarn tails that are happening right now, but it's okay, don't let that overwhelm you. Right now I'm looking at these two strands on the very edge, and if you can see this little teardrop shape, that is where we're going to insert our hook. Make sure you're working on the side that has that super long tail where we finished off this panel. I'm using that yarn to get my hands into crochet position, and I'm looking at that teardrop where the waist yarn is coming out of. That's where I'm inserting my hook. Now I'm pulling a loop through and chaining one. That's going to count as our first stitch along this panel. From here I'm going to begin single crocheting in these raised loops all along the bottom of my panel. So that's my second stitch. Here's my third. We will continue this all the way down, counting our stitches along the way. We know that there's 45 stitches in total because we used 45 pegs on the Sentro machine in panel mode. I'll go ahead and speed up the footage with about 5 stitches remaining just so I can show you how to finish this row off. Here I have 5 stitches remaining, and I'm going to show them to you. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4. And this 5th one is this weird looking loop at the very end. I'll show you how to work into that. So still counting as I go. Here's 41, 42, 43, 44, and my 45th stitch in this weird loop at the very end. I'm going to insert my hook in there somehow. Just leave a single crochet, chain 1, and pull your yarn through completely. We're going to keep this super long tail because we're going to keep using it for another purpose later. At this point, you can begin unraveling your waist yarn to reuse for other panels over and over and over. In order to get a center pull, I just pinch the yarn between my 2 fingers and wrap it around like this. Taking a moment here to really appreciate this unravel. Look at how clean that is. I love it. Now that my waist yarn is completely detached, I'm just raveling up this last bit, grabbing that strand that I pinched between my fingers and pulling out a little bit of yarn, sliding it off of my hand, and safely wrapping it up for next usage. Let's move on to securing off the other side of the panel. It's going to be exactly like the first side that I just demonstrated, but it's just going to feel a little bit different because you're going to have to hold the panel weird. But yeah, I'm looking at these two strands at the very end, and that first little upside down teardrop shape is where I want to insert my hook. So getting everything into crochet position, I'm going to start here, moving my tail out of the way, pulling a loop through and chaining one. That counts as my first stitch. Begin single crocheting in all of these raised loops that you see. So that was my second stitch. Here's my third, fourth, fifth, and so on. Continue counting all the way down, and I'll meet you towards the end to show you how to finish this off. I'm towards the end of my row here with 5 stitches left. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I have this funky, weird last stitch, but I know it's a stitch because I can see the waist yarn holding on to it. And I've only counted 40 stitches so far. So here's my 41st, 42, 43. This looks like what would be the last stitch, but it's only 44. And I'm going to see what this waist yarn is anchoring onto, and I'm going to single crochet right into that. That's my 45th stitch. Chain one and pull the rest of your tail through. Now it's time to start unraveling this. Now it's not as easy as the other side. I'm going to trim this tail just a little bit to make it easier while I get started here. But you're going to have to go one by one, you guys. I do demonstrate an easier way to unravel this. If you watch me make the next panel, I'm going to demonstrate a zip strip, which is just a single lifeline of a different color waist yarn that you put in between your waist yarn and your regular panel, and you just zip it out. So yeah, here's the edge of my panel all cleaned up now. And here's what the whole panel looks like so far. Yes, the edges are going to curl. That's okay. They won't after we sew everything together. So now I'm going to make another panel starting with this dark green instead of the light green. And I'm going to demonstrate how to do a zip strip with this other contrasting waist yarn. So I'm going to go ahead and get started adding my waist yarn to the third peg. Also making sure we're in panel mode. So here is the third peg. Locking my yarn on and securing it completely, and then going around and in front all these pegs until I get to this last one, stopping at that knuckle. Just like the first panel. Once I see that white peg, I'm going to wrap my yarn around this knuckle, put my yarn through the yarn feeder and the tension guide, crank all the way until my wheel stops, and then pulling my yarn, giving it a little tug, and working backwards. So I'm going to make a few rows of this until I use up this whole ball of yarn. Once you do that, you are ready for your zip strip. So I am cranking backwards and bringing in this waist yarn. It's very short. It can only go around for one rotation, but I'm just adding it right here to easily detach this waist yarn later. Check this out. Once I finish one full rotation in a different contrasting color, I'm just going to detach my yarn right here at this knuckle, and then I'm ready to start my next panel. I'm just winding up all of this yarn for the edging. No need to repeat all of these instructions. Just go back a few minutes and rewatch the instructions for the first panel that we did. Just alternate your colors. I'll get back to you on finishing off this edge and showing you the magic of the zip strip. So yeah. Here I have my finished panel laid out, showing you where my zip strip is. So everything is the exact same with finishing this off. You're just going to look for that little teardrop here where your waist yarn is connecting. And I could have used a better color because my green is such a cool tone, but yeah, you're going to finish this off with 45 stitches, starting with this slip stitch and a chain one for the very first stitch, and then single crocheting in all of these raised loops in your color for your panel. And once we get through this, I'm going to show you the magic of the zip strip. Once you have all 45 stitches secured in place and you've chained one and just secured your work, we're going to now remove this. So I need to untie this little knot that I have at the end over here, and I'm going to flip this over to give you a better angle. I love how this looks with just one row of color change. So now that I don't have any knots at the ends, I'm just going to pull it out from one side. It's all going to cinch up kind of like a beanie for a second, and if your yarn has a lot of resistance, you might have to pull really hard. Eventually it will release and you can just peel that waste yarn right off. I love how satisfying that is, and it's just as clean. Let's get started with the front left panel. Now I'm breaking out the masking tape for visual markers for you guys just to make this easier. We're going to do some increasing for the neck hole. And I'm going to put these markers on the pegs that you should not pass. So I'm going to crank this wheel off to the right a little bit, if you can see my white peg over here. So I'm ignoring these 3 pegs, and I'm going to put a marker to the right of this 3rd peg, the one that we're used to latching our yarn onto. Now I'm going to count 35 stitches away, which is peg 37, and I'm going to place a marker to the left of that peg. That's the knuckle that I know not to pass, not to go any further past. So here is peg 37, and I'm going to put my tape just to the left of it. Now I am just going to crank my wheel back. Yeah, it's in tube mode right now, but I'm going to switch it to panel mode in just a second. I just didn't want it to lock up to me while I was on the wrong side. So yeah, I'm going to latch my yarn onto this 3rd peg. The yarn is latched, and now I'm going to crank it until it secures and then go back and forth amongst these pegs up until peg 37, which is where I have my marker at. So follow along with me if you want to make this neck hole. We're going to get some practice rounds in with this waste yarn, so don't be afraid, okay? Alright, I'm approaching peg 37. Wrapping my yarn around the front of that peg and then around the knuckle to the left of it, feeding my yarn through the yarn feeder and tension guide. But we're not safe yet. We have to crank until the yarn drops off of that knuckle. So now we're safe to go backwards. Giving my yarn a little tug for tension as I get cranking backwards. And now I'm going to go all the way to peg 3 where we can start. If you're in panel mode, you should be in panel mode. Your machine should be able to lock completely without you going past that blue peg. So this is the safe blue peg, and right now my machine is fighting me. Okay, I fixed it because I'm the Sentro Queen. Oh my god, Queen. My machine is locked, and now I am going backwards in the opposite direction. Once you see peg 37 approaching, you better slow your roll, cowboy. And check for that lifted stitch. Alright, now I have to keep going until my yarn drops off that knuckle completely. Don't go a knuckle further. And now you're ready to start cranking backwards, giving your yarn a little tug. And on this side of our wheel, we can just continue to crank it until it locks completely. Just be aware of those lifted stitches. Let's do this a couple of times, practicing with our waste yarn and making sure we don't go past these blue pegs. So here's peg 37, cranking until my yarn drops off of that knuckle completely, and then going backwards. Once you get the hang of this, you start to go pretty fast, and you can feel yourself like getting the hang of it. So yeah, let's do exactly that, getting the hang of this with our waste yarn. Do it as many times as you need to until you feel like you have really good control over not letting the yarn slip past those blue knuckles. Once you successfully have 10 to 15 rows of waste yarn, I'm going to detach my yarn and bring in my new color for my panel. Make sure your tail is super long so that we can finish that edge off. Let's secure our yarn in our yarn feeder and the tension guider. Let's reset our counter if we have one. Now we're going to do 10 rows of this with 35 stitches, and after 10 rows we're going to begin increasing. So pay close attention to your row counts at this point. It's only 10 rows. You can count as you go. This is our first row. I'm not going past these blue pegs. This is my second row, so on and so forth. So let's get through these 10 rows and I'm going to start showing you how to increase. Right now I'm finishing up my 10th row. For the next 20 rows, we're going to be increasing on every other row. So I'm going to be filling in these pegs over here to the right. So what I'm going to do to help you with this is give you a visual marker with this blue tape. I'm going to move it over one knuckle, just one. And for this specific panel, we're moving it to the left. So let's get started with our first increase row. This is going to be row 11. We're going to crank and continue cranking all the way to this new knuckle. So pay attention closely. I will demonstrate. Here's the knuckle we normally stop at, but I'm going to keep going until the yarn drops off of this new knuckle. Now that's my increase. The next row is a regular row. So I'm just going to keep going just like normal. But now we have one more stitch. Stay on alert for these lifted stitches at the end of your rows. And now we have row 12 done. Row 13 is an increase row, so move your marker over one knuckle to the left. And that's our new knuckle that we're going to stop on. So getting started with that. Cranking all the way to the end. My new stitch is definitely going to lift up, so I'm pushing that down and cranking all the way to this new knuckle. Now that the yarn has dropped off, we can go backwards. And that's our increase for row 13. So this is row 14, regular row. Now that row 14 is done, I'm going to prep for row 15, move my marker over one knuckle to the left, and getting started with row 15 for the increase. Check for those lifted stitches at the end. It surprisingly didn't happen here. And then crank until the yarn drops off of your new knuckle. Cranking backwards for row 16, which is a regular row. At the end of this, I'm going to prep for the next increase row, moving my marker over one knuckle to the left. And yeah, I hope you're starting to get the hang of this by now. We're going to keep filling in all of these pegs all the way up into this last peg before the white one. We're going to completely ignore those 3 pegs, just like a regular panel. And once we have all of these filled in, we can just crank like normal with our machine locking up, like at the beginning and end of all of our rows, and we don't really have to pay attention that much, you know? So I'm going to keep doing this, but I'm not going to cut the footage. I do want you to be able to see what's going on. I just don't think I need to repeat the steps for every row. Just move your tape over if you're using tape, or not if you're not using tape. But our main goal is to get back to 45 stitches. If you are using tape though, like me, I would love to know if this hack was helpful for you or not. Like leave me a little comment. Let me know how this worked for you, if this helped you visually or even spiritually. I just love to know. I personally think that this little hack is really cool and it helps me stay on track. But also, I do not have high quality equipment and you cannot see the numbers on my knitting machine. So I kind of have to do this. This is not a tip or trick that I picked up anywhere else. I came up with this one because I thought it would be helpful. I wish other people did it whenever I was learning. But that's why I am here for you. Last increase row. I'm moving my tape to this knuckle right before the white peg. Let's do this last increase row. So this is row 29. Y'all ready to be done with these increases? Now looky here, your machine should be able to lock completely. You can't go any further. So now I can crank backwards with my regular row, which is row 30. And from here, we're back to normal. Are you excited? Are you relieved? Sure you are. So let's get back to our row counts depending on what size that you made. I am making the size small, so I need 45 rows total. Therefore, I have 15 more rows before I add my next color. So just like the back panels, add in your new color with short tails, do 45 more rows in that color, Make sure you have a super long tail before cutting your yarn off, and then do your waist yarn. Never forget your waist yarn. And now you can detach your panel. So here's what the front of our panel looks like with the neck hole increase. I love the shape of it. Now we need to fasten this off. So we know that there are 35 stitches all across the top of this side of the panel. So we're going to fasten it off just like normal. This time you need to only count 35 stitches instead of 45. Whenever you fasten off for the other side of the panel, that's going to be 45 stitches. So just keep that in mind. No need to show you these steps all the way over again. Let's get started with our right front panel. Now, it's the same but different. I'm going to use my masking tape again. This time we're going to place our marker to the right of peg 13. So here's peg 13, and here is the knuckle to the right where I'm placing my marker. Next, we're going to look for peg 47. So that's the very last peg before the white one. We're going to place our marker on the knuckle to the left. Once your markers are in place, we're going to wind back to this peg 13 and then make sure you switch back to panel mode. Let's go ahead and get started with our waist yarn. We are only casting on to pegs 13 through 47. So going back and forth all the way to peg 47, I should be able to completely lock my wheel whenever I get to this 47th peg. When you see your last peg approaching, what you'll have to do is wrap your yarn around that knuckle with the blue tape, and then through your yarn feeder and then tension guide. And then continue cranking until it locks completely. Making sure our yarn hasn't tucked under any other knuckles. Now we can go backwards and we'll stop at this 13th peg. This time we need to stay aware of the end of this row because our wheel is not going to lock. We have to manually watch it drop off of this knuckle right after the 13th peg. As you can see, the yarn has dropped. Now I can go backwards, giving my yarn a little bit of tension at the beginning of this row, and now I can crank this way until it locks completely. Alright, let's keep doing this waist yarn until we have about 10 to 15 rows, or you've used up your entire ball of yarn, but just practice staying within peg 13 through 47 for the entirety of your waist yarn. Since I did not demonstrate how to do a zip strip on the other front panel, I'm going to show you how to do one this time. So grab that waist yarn in another contrasting color, and we're going to attach it starting on peg 13. Alright, I've used up all of my waist yarn. I'm at peg 13. I'm getting my zip strip color. I'm going to use this bright color, and I'm just going to floss it through my feeder, through my tension guide, and then just do one rotation with this contrasting color. Once I've done one full rotation and I've locked my machine completely, I'm going to bring this back, aligning my blue peg with the feeder, laying down this zip strip. I gave her a little trim because we don't need all that. Bringing in my main color with a super long tail, picking up where we left off with the zip strip. I'm feeding this through the yarn feeder and tension guide, and now we're going to do 10 rows, only working on pegs 13 through 47. So let's get started with row 1, making sure my yarn doesn't go any further past this blue knuckle. Row 2, my machine should lock completely. I'm going to speed up the footage for the rest of these 10 rows, and then I'm going to show you how to increase. Now that we have our first 10 rows completed, we're going to increase and fill in these pegs over here to the left. So let's move our marker over one knuckle to the right for this panel. And now we're going to crank backwards and continue cranking until our yarn drops off of this new knuckle. As you can see here, This is the peg that we normally drop off of, and now we're going to drop off one more. Now let's go back for a regular row. This is row 12. Here we can crank until our wheel stops completely. Now let's prep for the next row, moving our marker over one knuckle. Now we're cranking backwards, looking for those lifted stitches at the end of our rows, and then cranking until our yarn drops off of this new knuckle. Let's go back for a regular row. Hopefully you're seeing the pattern here. If you got through the first panel, then I'm pretty sure you're going to get through this one too. You got this. We're going to continue increasing all the way up to peg 3, back to 45 stitches total. I'm going to speed up the footage for this part, and I'll meet you and give you little updates of what you have to do next. But I'm not going to go through all the steps. If you need a little reminder, just rewind a little bit, but no need to repeat myself. You got this. Right now I'm doing my last increase row, and as you can see, my wheel can lock completely, and these 3 pegs are not touched. So now I can start cranking back and forth with ease and not have to freaking worry about if my yarn is about to go past the wrong knuckle. So I'm going to finish my 45 rows in this color and then transition to my next color. And I'm just going to finish this panel. Y'all know what to do. Once you have successfully made 2 front panels, we're going to start sewing it up, and we need our stitch markers. So place your stitch marker on the inside of both front panels. You might have to uncurl the sides to see which one is like the right row to put this on, but just try your best to find that inner row, placing your stitch marker. And then we're basically going to buckle these stitch markers together just so that they can be in close proximity while we are stitching this up together. Once you have that part figured out, we're going to take these ties right here where the color transitions are. If you haven't tied your knots yet, go ahead and do that. But I'm going to take another stitch marker and just buckle these together as well. These are the stitches that I know need to be together whenever I reach this point, because I don't want my checkers off. I want my checkers crispy. So yeah, let's get started with the sewing part. Y'all ready? Let's move on down to the bottom of our front panels, and you know that we have these super long tails, so we're going to take one of these super long tails and use our tapestry needle. And this long tail is what we're going to use to sew our panels together. So coming in close here, I'm looking for the furthest corner of my light green panel, and I'm going to insert my needle through the back of that. As you can see, the braids at the very bottom of that panel. Threading my yarn through this stitch to connect the corners, and I'm going to lay this down flat just so I can get a little idea here. We're going to have to constantly like uncurl this to see what's going on here, but once you get the hang of it, you'll get faster at it. So as you can see, these little braids, if I stretch them apart, you can see these bars inside of each of them. I'm going to scoop up one of these bars, inserting my needle from the top and then coming out from the bottom, and then doing this on the opposite side as well. I have to uncurl it a little bit. Now, every time we insert our needle, it has to enter where the yarn was last left off at. So I'm inserting from the top and coming up from the bottom, and then going back to the other panel. Inserting my needle from the top where we last left off, scooping up that bar, and then going to the next panel. inserting my needle from the top where we last left off, scooping up that bar, and then going back and forth. I'm gonna speed up the footage just a little bit so we can get through this because I got a few more steps to show you, and I gotta cram it all up in this tutorial, okay? Real quick before I go too far, one thing I do need to show you is that you need to pull on your string so that you can cinch this together. Yeah, do that every few inches so that you can make this all nice, pretty, and cinched. So let's get back to it. Let's keep going. Let's keep sewing. Let's go. Once you get to your color transitions, be extra careful with your stitches here. This is a great time to start counting and making sure that you have the same amount of stitches. If you don't, like if there's one off, you can do a little double loop scoop on one side of the panel just so that you can get these checkers to be perfectly aligned. You got this. I have faith. It's an experimental process, especially if your row counts are even one off. But yeah, you can finesse this a little bit by doing a little double loop scoop. Right now I'm also fighting with these extra tails in my way. Yeah, you just gotta work around it. But overall, I am satisfied with my checkered connection. So now I'm gonna continue sewing this together all the way up to that V-neck neckline. Once you've sewn all the way up to the top of your V-neck, make sure you give it a cinch close. And now we're going to do a little security fasten here. So I'm just going to loop this through the corners one more time. Let's get our stitch markers out of the way before we finish this. How about that? All right, now with that loop we just made, let's go back up through it. Yeah, let's tie this off. It's secured now. We're good. I'm not going to cut this tail. I'm going to leave it on just hanging out for now because it's not doing any damage. But now we have our front panel. It looks so cute. Now we got to start doing the back panel. We're going to sew the back panel just like the front, but we just need to make sure that orientation is right. We need the same colors on the same shoulders. Does that make sense? So once you've figured out your orientation, you're gonna now get started on your back panels and sew those together. So find your longest tail with the inside seam and then sew that together. You can place your markers and buckle them together for these center stitches so that your stitching is very even as you go. And then do the same exact thing, sewing the panels closed one bar at a time. Now that I have my back panel sewed up, it is time to sew the shoulders together. I've aligned my front and back panels with their corresponding colors. Now, we know that the top of our front panels are 35 stitches and our back panels are 45. So we need to count 35 stitches from our shoulders all the way to the inside so that we can stitch these together accurately. So I counted 35 stitches inside and left my stitch marker there. Now I'm going to count 35 stitches on the opposite side, leaving my stitch marker there. Once I have my stitch markers where they belong, I'm going to now secure them to the corners, the top corners of my front panels. So there's the left shoulder, and now here's the right shoulder. Everything's connected. I'm ready to start sewing. So flipping my work around, I'm grabbing one of these long tails on the inside of the neck hole, and I'm going to connect these stitches together before I remove the stitch marker. So inserting from the bottom up on both corners. Now getting that stitch marker out of the way, we don't need you anymore. And now I'm going to start sewing this up one stitch at a time, going up from the bottom through these single crochet stitches. Going to the opposite panel, up from the bottom, and back and forth. I'm going to do this all the way down, making sure I sew into all 35 stitches of both panels. Just like the sewing we did on our front panel and back panel, make sure that you cinch this together every few inches or so because your string, it's going to be a little loose. So do the cinching I'm going to go ahead and speed up the footage and skip ahead a little bit so that we can get through this tutorial. I'll meet you at the end, but you're going to do this for both sides of your shoulders. Okay, this is what it looks like whenever you're done. And do the same on the opposite side. Here's what our shoulders look like all closed up. Next, we need to sew up the sides. So we need to count down 48 rows, and that's where we're going to put our stitch markers. Now, we know that for this size small, this color change, this top of the color is 45 rows long. So I'm just going to count 3 more rows below this to get to 48. So we need to count 48 stitches on all 4 panels. So we know that this is 45 rows long. I'm going to count 3 more rows down. Now, if you did a solid color sweater or you just had a different row count for your color transitions, you will have to count your rows by identifying the V shapes per column, I guess. So yeah, you'll have to manually count that. Once you have all 4 stitch markers secured in place, we're going to basically buckle them together and start sewing up the sides just like we did with our front panels. So here I am buckling, putting the sides together in close proximity, coming in real close to show you what I'm doing. So I have this super long tail, but I'm going to give it a little trim because we don't have to sew that far. So going back and forth just like I did on the front and back panels, scooping up a bar from both sides. And then once we get to our stitch markers, we're just going to secure this off with that secured knot. I'm also going to continue to keep this tail long. We're going to keep using it for another purpose later. So here's what one side looks like, all perfectly sewn up, neat and clean. We're going to do the same exact thing on the opposite side. So use one of your long tails and sew all the way up to the armpit. Here's what both sides look like, completely sewn up. Next, we're going to begin doing single crochet decreases all around this armhole, and we're going to attach our yarn with one of these strands that match the color of the panel. So I'm working with the sage green yarn, and I'm going to do the magic knot technique. I'm not sure how to explain this very well. I'm going to do my best to demonstrate it though. But I just take my yarn, wrap it around both strands, and basically tie a knot on itself. Taking my other strand, going over the top, wrapping around both strands and tying a knot. And then I can pull those together. This knot is so strong, like you can cut the tails off completely, and it's still not going to break. Now we're going to drop down a hook size. I'm dropping down to a 4mm. I'm grabbing my yarn that is now connected to my skein with the magic knot, and I want to work on the outside of the sweater. I don't want to work looking at the inside. So I'm just showing you where I'm going to insert my hooks for the rows. Like here's a stitch. It's basically like how we were doing with picking up the bars. Everywhere between these bars is like one stitch. And what we're going to be doing around this armhole are decreases. So if you think about it, if we decrease on every stitch, all 48 stitches down that we just counted, we should end up with 24 stitches on both sides of our panel. Well, guess what? We're about to make some arms in tube mode, and those are 48 stitches around. So when we go to sew our arms onto this body, everything's going to align. So let's get started here. I inserted my hook and chained one. Now I am doing my first decrease, inserting my hook, basically looking at these sideways V shapes, and I'm trying to stay within one column of that. I don't want my hook to start going into different rows because then it's going to start looking weird. So I'm trying to stay on this one row of these V's, doing a single crochet decrease in every stitch all the way down. And you should count as you go. So my goal is to be getting to 24 stitches by the time I'm down here at the bottom of this armpit. So here's my 24 stitches. It should be stretchy. It should not be tight. Now you can pivot your work and begin doing the same thing on the other panel. decreasing in every stitch and counting as you go. Your goal is to get to 24 more stitches. So we're going to have a total count of 48 stitches. Once you're through decreasing all the way up to the top of the shoulder, we're just going to connect with a slip stitch in that first chain 1 space that we made. Chain 1 and then pull your tail through and cut it to a length that you can sew in later. Right now I'm going to tie these 2 strands together. This isn't necessary, I'm just doing it for funsies. But yeah, look at our armhole, y'all. It's so cute. Alright, I connected my string with the magic knot already, and once again, I'm just prepping you. We're going to be working on the outside of the sweater. Now repeat all the steps you just did for the other armhole. Let's give her a little try on real quick. Ain't she like a cute little vest right now? I would totally wear this as is, you know, with the tails all sewn up and all, but this looks so cool. I love it already. I'm just doing a little check on how stretchy my armholes ended up being. They're nice and stretchy, and I'm ready to start making the arms. Let's get started with these arms. I got my waist yarn, I got my zip strip, and I've switched my machine to tube mode. We are aligning this white peg with our yarn feeder, and then we're going to latch our waist yarn on. Pretty much the same way, just like panel mode, latching until and lock it, going back and forth in front of all of these pegs. I'm going to go all the way around this time. When you see that white peg coming back up, we're going to wrap our yarn around this knuckle right before that white peg. So wrap it around that knuckle and then feed it through your yarn feeder and then through your tension guide. And now I'm giving my starting tail some tension and kicking off in one direction, going over and over and over and over until I use up this entire waist yarn. When you see your waist yarn getting a little too short, just make sure that you stop with the white peg lifted up like this. When it's time to do color transitions, we specifically need this knuckle to be aligned with our yarn feeder. So I'm laying my waist yarn down, bringing in my zip strip color, putting it in my yarn feeder and tension guide, and we're going to do one full rotation of this. So I'm holding both of those tails as I get started, and I'm going to stop whenever the white peg reaches my yarn feeder again. So here it is, making sure I don't have any lifted stitches through this transition. I'm going to trim this a little bit because I don't need all of that. Now, let's bring in our main colors. We got to have a super long tail. Don't forget that super long tail. Put your main color through your yarn feeder and then tension guide. Now I'm holding all these tails. If you have a row counter, don't forget to turn that thing on. Alright. For this size small, I'm going to do 40 rows of each color, making sure that none of my stitches are lifted or dropped, and I'm going to continue working until I get 40 rows. Here I am finishing up row 40. Making sure my white peg is aligned with my yarn feeder. And now it's time to transition colors. So we don't need any long tails. So I'm going to lay that old color down, bring in my new color, and reset my row counter. Now holding both of the tails while I get started with this first row. And now I can let go and do 40 more rows. After you've completed 40 rows of your next color, make sure you get a super long tail, and then you can throw it up in there, bring in your waist yarn, flouse it through your feeder. You only need a short tail. You don't need a long tail for the waist yarn. And then holding both tails, I get cranking. I'm going to crank until I use this entire ball of yarn, but you really only need 10 to 15 rows. I ended up running out of waist yarn very quickly, so as you can see here, it doesn't matter where your pegs are. Whenever you run out of yarn, just toss it out and then do 2 full rotations in the same direction you've been cranking. It's just going to fall right off. Look at how beautiful it is! So let's give her a good stretch and get started with cleaning up these edges. I'm going to start on the side with the zip strip. And look at my little baby joining us today. Okay, I'm grabbing my super long tail and I'm looking for the loop where my working yarn is coming out of, whatever it's anchoring into. So I can see this bar right here. This is where my waist yarn is kind of coming out of. So I'm going to try and insert my hook into that bar. I'm going to pull a loop through and then chain one. So that's going to count as my first stitch. Next, I'm going to look for these raised loops in my sage green color and single crochet into all of them, just like we did on the panels. So there's my second stitch, here's my third, here's my fourth, and so on and so forth. We're going to be doing 48 stitches all the way around this armhole because our Sentro machine only has 48 pegs. So we need to be counting and paying attention very closely here. If your tail ended up being too short, just like mine here, don't forget that you have the magic knot technique to reattach your skein to your working yarn. And that's what I'm doing here so I can finish my single crochets around this armhole. Right now, I'm leaving my very last single crochet in this raised loop. And after we have our 48 stitches, it's time to slip stitch and connect to the stitch where we began. So I'm pulling my yarn through, chaining one, and leaving a long enough tail to weave in later. So let's detach our waist yarn by pulling this zip strip. Just make sure that you don't have any knots tied, but give it a good hard pull. It's kind of cinching up like a beanie right now, but yeah. One good swift tug and it'll peel right off. And look at how clean this edge is. Time to fasten off the other side of our arm. So it's pretty similar to the other side. Maybe you could just see this a little better. Yeah, we're looking at these teardrop shapes and I'm inserting my hook right where my working yarn was last left off. Starting with that chain one in that very first stitch and then single crochets in all of these raised loops. Don't forget we're counting as we go. Our goal is to get to 48 stitches all the way around this armhole. After you've left your 48th stitch, we're going to connect by slip stitching into that very first stitch, chaining one, and I'm pulling a super long tail. I'm going to use this to basically sew this arm onto the body. And now from here we can unravel our waist yarn. Here's the finished product. Everything's looking so good. Now, don't be alarmed, but there's a possibility that your color transition might not look crispy, but all you gotta do is go in there and tighten those strands. Check that out. Nice and neat. I did it a little too tight. Don't get too crazy with it. Once you have this sleeve complete, go ahead and make a second one. Just alternate your colors whenever you do it on the tube setting. After you have completed both of your sleeves, it's time to get to sewing. So I'm grabbing a sleeve that is opposite of this top panel color. So I'm doing the dark green up against the light green color. And now I'm going to count 24 stitches away from my tail and leave my stitch marker there and connect that stitch marker to the top shoulder of my work here. Next, I'm taking the super long tail and feeding it through my tapestry needle, and I'm going to begin at the bottom armpit section of this sweater, inserting my hook up from the bottom, and just like we sewed the shoulders together, we're going to go through all these single crochets up from the bottom, and then going to the other side, up from the bottom, back and forth. You can count your stitches along the way here as well, so we know that there's 24 stitches to go up until we reach the stitch marker. And don't forget to cinch this, by the way. Like, damn, I almost forgot and went too far. Now it's a little difficult to cinch this together close. Now, if you over cinch, just pull it. It's okay. Keep on going and keep on cinching. I did it again. I need to cinch this more frequently than I am currently doing. So, yeah, do your thing. If you over cinch, it's okay. Just pull it back out. So I have now stitched up all the single crochets on 24 stitches on both sides. Now it's time to start doing it along the opposite side. Check this out. I didn't even cut the footage for this. I'm about to look at this super sew action. All right, when you get to the very bottom of this armpit, you're gonna do a little finessing. Okay, there's no specifics here. I'm just doing my best to try to get this to connect and look as pretty as possible. If you do amigurumi, this is probably going to be real easy for you, but I don't know. There's something about this part that I can't help you with it because I can't even help myself. It is real weird to me. So just know that I am praying for your success. I promise I'm not praying for your downfall here. Just if you knew better, you'd do better, but neither of us know. So just do your best. Once I'm done sewing the absolute shit out of that armpit, I'm gonna tie that tail to some other random ass tail around the armpit area. I'm gonna tie a few knots a couple times, and there we have it. My arm's sewed on. Look at it. It looks cool. See, that wasn't so bad after all. Now let's do it again. Are you happy with how it's looking so far? Are you ready for the finishing touches? The first finishing touch we're gonna do are the cuffs on the sleeves, okay? So for my sleeve cuff, I'm going to do dark green or whatever contrasting color you have going on for your color combo. And I'm inserting my hook into this far corner where the tail is, bringing in my dark green color, pulling the yarn through, and then chaining one to secure my yarn. Next, I'm going to begin a little decrease pattern. So I'm going to leave my first single crochet in this first stitch, and then now I'm going to start decreasing every 2 stitches. So there's 1 decrease, here's another decrease, and then my next stitch is a regular single crochet. Repeat, 2 decreases, there's 1, there's 2, and then a regular single crochet. Also, if you've noticed, I've been crocheting over this tail so that I don't have to weave it in. The less tails, the better, right? Alright, continue your pattern of 2 decreases and 1 single crochet all the way around, and I'll meet you at the end. I'm back to the beginning of my single crochets, and I'm just leaving 1 more single crochet just because I feel like it, and connecting with the slip stitch. Let's take a moment to admire our work real quick. Look at how it's all cinched in and no longer curling out. Alright, we're about to start doing the ribbing now. So what we're gonna do from here, I'm gonna chain up 8 chains plus 1, so 9 chains total. Check it out, here's my 9 chains. Now we're going to begin single crocheting into the second chain from the hook and all the way down. So I should have 8 single crochets total. Here's 5, 6, 7, and my last one, 8. Now from here, we're going to slip stitch to connect it back to our arm, and we're going to slip stitch in the stitch over, so not the one that we just came out of. Next, slip stitch 1 more time to begin our next row of ribbing. From here, we're going to skip over these 2 chains, those 2 braids where we just slip stitched, and we're going to single crochet into the back loop of this stitch right here. So here's my first single crochet, and then continue working up the backs of these stitches. Here's my 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and my last 8th stitch. Chain 1, turn your work. Again, single crochet into the backs of these stitches. So I'm going to single crochet into the back of these 8 stitches. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Slowing back down to show you again how to connect. Slip stitch into the stitch over. Slip stitch again to begin the next row. Completely skip over those 2 slip stitches, those 2 braids you see right there, and then begin your single crochets in the back of this first single crochet. Repeat these steps all the way around until you completely orbit your armhole, and I'll meet you towards the end to show you how to close this up. Alrighty folks, we're towards the finish line. I am just going to leave these last 2 slip stitches right here to close this up. Now I'm going to turn this to the side, and I'm counting my stitches down just to identify all 8. So I can see my 8th stitch down here at the bottom, inserting my hook, and then going over to the other side, inserting my hook into the back stitch of that single crochet, and then slip stitching. Going up to the next stitch, repeating the same step. Picking up 1 loop on both sides of my ribbing and closing it up with a little slip stitch. Doing that 8 times up this little cuff. Yeah, let's speed this up. I'm getting a little impatient. After you've slip stitched into all 8 stitches, you're going to chain 1, pull a long enough tail for you to weave in later, and cut your yarn off. Now, after this, you just got to do this on the other cuff, which I did off camera. As you can see, I alternated the color again. Now we're going to begin working around the neck hole, attaching our yarn up here at the top. But first, we're going to have to flip this around because we want to work with the outside facing us. And we're going to start with a solid row of single crochet. So inserting my hook into somewhere around the center seam, pulling my yarn through, and then securing it with the chain 1. From here, we're going to single crochet into every stitch up until we get to this corner where our front and back panels meet. So just a few stitches until we get there. I've approached this corner, and here I'm going to just try and do some sort of decrease, connecting these 2 corners together with kind of a rounded edge. That's kind of the goal that I'm going for. Let's continue working down our front panels of our neck hole. I'm going to insert 1 single crochet right here in the corner, and then I'm going to do 4 decreases and then single crochet down these increase rows. So let's start with this first decrease. Here's my first, second, third, and my 4th. Now we have approached these increase rows, and the top of them kind of look a little funky. We're going to stop decreasing. We're just going to do regular rows of single crochet down to the bottom of this V-neck. And I'm not exactly sure how to explain what we're looking for. I'm really just going based off of feel and measurement. I'm inserting my hook far enough away from my last stitch that I know that that's an appropriate amount of space to leave a single crochet. So there's a lot of intuition that goes on right here. So just try your best to get around this neck hole with your single crochets. We basically just need a solid foundation row so that we can attach our ribbing in the appropriate spots. And this row of single crochet is going to make that easy for us. Once you've worked your way past all those increase rows, don't forget to leave your decreases here. I'm leaving 5 decreases just to round this corner completely. So this is my 4th decrease that I'm working on right now. Then I'm going straight into a decrease to connect these front and back panels and round off this corner of the neck hole. Now pivot your work and continue single crocheting along this half of the neck hole up until you reach that center stitch where we began. Looky here, we made it. So I'm gonna slip stitch right into that very first single crochet where we started. And then from here we can begin doing our ribbing just like the cuffs. The only difference is we're going to do this a little shorter than our cuffs. We don't want this ribbing to be as freaking long as our cuffs. So we're going to do a chain 6, which is going to result in 5 stitches total. Here are my 6 chains. Single crochet into the second chain from the hook. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. slip stitch into the next stitch to connect, slip stitch again to begin the next row. Turn your work, completely skip over those 2 slip stitches, single crochet into the back stitches of all 5 single crochet. There's my 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Chain 1, turn your work, single crochet into the back loop of all 5 stitches. There's 2, 3, 4, and 5. Again, slip stitch in the next stitch to connect, slip stitch again to begin the next row. I'm gonna go ahead and complete this all the way around, orbiting this neck hole, and I'll meet you at the end to show you how to connect and close it up. Here we have it, folks. Okay, all I have remaining here is just 1 stitch, so I'm just gonna slip stitch right up in there. And then looking at my work, I can see all 5 of those stitches from that first side of the ribbing. And I'm going to connect this just like I did with the cuffs, inserting my hook into that very bottom stitch, and then inserting my hook into the back loop on the opposite side, pulling a slip stitch through. I'm going to do that 5 times up this neck ribbing. And once you have all 5 of those slip stitches, chain 1, pull a long enough tail to weave it in later, cut your yarn, and we're done. Do you like this neck hole? Do you like how stretchy it is and cute it is? I hope you do. Well, guess what? We have one last finishing touch to do, and that is the waistline. And I want the waistline thickness to be the same thickness as the collar. So I'm gonna go ahead and flip this over, get started with attaching my yarn with the magic knot technique. I'm starting in this middle seam here in the back and grabbing one of these tails in the same color I'm about to work with. Once my skein is attached to my working yarn, I'm going to begin a single crochet and 1 decrease pattern. So I'm inserting my hook into the stitch, chaining 1, and then single crocheting into that same stitch. Next, moving over, doing a decrease. Single crochet after that, and then decrease. You're going to continue this pattern all the way around your waistline, and then you'll finish off with a slip stitch to connect the beginning and end of your row. But don't cut your yarn whenever you're done, okay? Here is my row completed. The waistline is no longer curling. Now it's time to do the ribbing part, and I'm going to do it exactly like I did with the collar. I'm going to chain up 6 and have 5 stitches of single crochet all the way around the waistline, and this is the finished piece. Look at it! Look at it! Are you happy with yours? I'm so happy with mine. Yeah, there's a lot of tails that we gotta weave in. I'm so sorry. We'll get to that part, but just admire it. Just love it. Love it. Guys, it's been a real pleasure. It took me 5 weeks to record and edit all of this footage. I'm super dedicated to teaching you guys basically new tricks and explaining it in the easiest ways as possible. I want to be thorough but not overbearing, so hope I accomplished that. But most importantly, I hope you are happy with what you've accomplished. Like, if you made it through this entire tutorial and you made the Sentro machine your bitch, I'm proud of you. And now I'm going to beg you to please like this video, tag me in your posts. I love to see them, I love to share them, and I love you guys. Alright, that's all for now. Toodles!